panel speaker before I open things up to Q&A. Jason Fox, Royal Marine Commander, of course, star of SAS, Who Dares Wins, totally different background, but I suspect some similar messages. Jason, you were trained to deal with frightening situations, and we all now find ourselves in a very frightening situation, and we don't know how we're going to get out the other end. But I just wonder what tips you've picked up along the way that might be useful to all of us.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on the webinar. But for me, I suppose when I got asked to come and talk to you all about resilience and sort of like going into an unknown crisis situation, which is something I've done quite a bit of in the past, in my past career, I figured the best way for me to start was give you a little bit of an insight, tell you a story really quickly about a situation that I was involved in. It's a little bit gritty, but essentially, I'm going to take you back to early September 2009. I'm sat in the back of a military helicopter, a Chinook helicopter, and I'm in the middle of a half-an-hour flight into an operation as a special forces operator. I'm wearing a helmet. I've got all my body armor on, weapons, and I've got night vision goggles on, which actually give you an element of distance and sort of, it makes everything look very much unreal. It looks like a computer game. Everything's in a green haze and everything's sort of, I don't know, it looks like a video game. And I'm sat on that helicopter wondering what this night has in store for me. And how did I get to be sat on that helicopter? Well, on the 31st of August, so just over a week before that, I was a member of a Special Forces squadron flying into the theatre of operations for a 6-month tour, and a 6-month tour, I suppose, can be likened to lockdown. You're secured in one area, you're not allowed to speak to anyone other than the group that you live with, and then every now and again when you do go out, you get shot at normally. So it's a very unnerving environment to be in, albeit that one that you have trained for and one that you choose to be in because that's your career. Anyway, fast forward again back to that helicopter journey. I'm there. I get given the 10-minute call, which means we've got 10 minutes before we land into what is essentially the unknown. I take my iPod off. I'm listening to music because that's a way of sort of like calming your nerves just prior to going into an operation. I put them away and I start concentrating on what it is I actually need to do as soon as we land. I start checking my kit. I then get the 6-minute call. Now, this is from one of the crew members in the helicopter. And literally, as he says that, I look out of the back of the Chinook helicopter where the ramp is down. And in that green haze, I can see, I'm in the second helicopter. I can see the third behind me floating in that green haze through the sky. And as he shouts out 6 minutes, the sky just erupts in what can only be described as the worst fireworks display I've ever witnessed in my life. You could see heavy machine gun fire coming towards us. I could see it, what I thought was hitting the helicopter behind us. You could feel the kinetic energy from rocket-propelled grenades exploding next to our helicopter. It was almost shifting it through the sky. And it was petrifying. And I can remember feeling petrified. And this was, this is a later tour for me. I'm supposed to be what is known as a combat veteran. And there I am, feeling the fear on another level. And it was during that time that I was that petrified. I was holding onto my knees, squeezing them that tightly that I had to consciously tell myself to let go, which is what I did. The pain didn't actually go away. And what happened in the confusion was I was actually holding onto my mate's knee. He had hold of mine and we had like a little embarrassing moment mid-flight. Joking aside though, that is essentially what happened. But that went on now for 6 minutes. We're getting shot at for 6 minutes, and for the first minute, yes, I was petrified, but then the human psyche has to survive that. I'm not going to change that situation for me, but what I can control is my feeling. And without even thinking about it, I just went into survival mode and I just normalized what was happening. Essentially, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, get me off this helicopter because I want to have some form of control over my fate. But at that moment in time, I couldn't control things. Anyway, the journey continued. 6 minutes became 3 minutes, became a minute. We got given the 30-second call. We all stand up in the helicopter and we get ready to disembark. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, the helicopter lands. And the brief was to run out, turn right, and basically engage the enemy and try to achieve our mission, which is what we did. Now, my actual objective was a group of buildings that were about 100 meters from my location. As I left the helicopter, I was with a group of other guys, and that 100 meters was broken down into what was essentially 50 meters of plowed field, or what I thought was a plowed field. Then there was a ditch with a hedgerow, and then there was another 50 meters of waste ground before the cluster of buildings, which was our objective. Make a funny noise, and although we had been given a mission, which is all that really mattered that night, in the back of my mind, that was where it was parked. I was then starting to break that night down into bite-sized chunks, and my first bite-sized chunk was to get into that ditch and have a moment, have a reset, take stock of the situation, think about what I needed to do, and then continue on. It was about 20 meters from that ditch. My legs are burning, my lungs are burning, and all I want to do is get into that ditch. It comes over the radio system, so we're all plumbed into a radio system where we can talk to each other. It comes over the radio that that's one friendly force, KIA, which essentially means one of our own team members, not in my team, but in another team, in another helicopter, had been killed. Now, I was overcome with emotion again. I wanted to know who it was. That wasn't important. All I needed to know as a member of the unit that was on the ground was that one of the teams that were with us was restricting its ability to maneuver. However, I got into that ditch, I rolled onto my back, I'm in the middle of a gunfight, and I start to check myself over and give myself that little reset. And it was at that moment that, again, I was overcome with an emotion. Now, it was obviously fear, but it was the first time that it ever manifested itself in the way that it just had, which was essentially I wanted to be back home as a 10-year-old boy with my mum sat on the sofa. Now, that rocked me for essentially a second, and I needed to do something to kick myself out of that sort of mental situation, the emotion. And what I did was just take stock of how I was feeling, and I took on board the fact that I was scared, and then I used that to sort of focus me on what was going on around me. I did have a second word. Right, you're a member of a special forces squadron, you're well trained, you know what you're doing, you've done this before, you've been in these situations before, have some confidence in who you are and your ability. But I also looked down the line of that ditch that I was in, and I saw the other guys that were with me, my teammates, and I actually, in that moment, took more strength from them, because I took strength from the fact that they're highly trained, highly motivated, they're people that I love, and I have a responsibility to them as they do to me. And it was at that point that we all stood up and kicked through the hedgerow. We continued on with that night. Now, that night was an emotional roller coaster for me. And there were many moments within that night where I wasn't too sure whether we were going to make it out of there. But we did. That was the tour. That tour was pretty much as was, that was how it went on for the rest of that 6 months. The operational tempo was extremely high. We picked up quite a lot of casualties with regard to the size of unit we were. We were essentially only 30 guys, and we picked up 25% casualty rate. And it was, every night was the unknown. You're flying or walking into the unknown. And it was after that tour that I came back, and I started to think about, I had a little bit of a wobble when I came back off that tour, but because of that, I started to look at why and how people like myself and the people around me get through those, and it became an interest for me. And in so looking at that, I started to realize the obvious things were obviously skills. We, as a military unit, we have the luxury of training all the time. Our learning and development is all the time. So we're constantly building up our skill set. We're constantly learning. We're constantly cementing muscle memory and mindset into what it is that we learn. But that isn't enough. And I started to look back further as to how I became that resilient individual that could overcome those emotions. And I think a lot of it boils down to culture, and the culture that is bred into the military. Now, I joined the Royal Marines as a 16-year-old teenager. And I did not know how to be a soldier then, and they knew that. But what they do right from the very beginning as a Royal Marines commander is they start to sort of change your mindset, and they try to focus you on to how you need to think and how you need to operate as an individual within that environment. And there's 4 pillars, actually. They call it the Commando Spirit, but it's made up of 4 pillars. One is courage, one is determination, one is unselfishness, and the last one, the 4th one, is cheerfulness in the face of adversity. Now, to break those down, courage doesn't mean they expect you to be brave and sort of storm machine gun nests on your own. What it is they expect you to have the courage to face challenges and to be able to want to accept that there are challenges in life, and you need to head them on, and you need to take that leap of faith when entering into a challenge. And I believe that is what they mean by courage. Determination is to have that stubborn mindset when you're in the middle of a crisis, and to continually think back to what it is that you've learned and continually push on to try and achieve your aim whilst in those crisis situations. Selfish about the people around you, and to breed unselfishness, you have to teach people that the people around them are important to them for them to survive. And that if you look after them, they in turn will look after you. And I think that's something that people can take away in the environment we're in at the moment. We hear about, people rushing to the shops and bulk buying, where as if people were unselfish, you'd be able to support the communities around you a lot better. Then you've got cheerfulness in the face of cheerfulness in the face of adversity. Now, this is one that I sort of focus on the most, and I feel it is extremely important. You need to find humor in extremely dark situations, and it comes down to having that positive mindset that Deborah was talking about earlier. Positivity is the key to getting yourself out of some really, really sticky situations. It gives you the strength of mind and character to push through and find a way out of a situation that is uncomfortable. Now, that all in line with itself does also lead me on to talk a little bit about something that Farah was talking about, which is the plan, the brief, the deliver, and the debrief. That is essentially how we break things down in the military, although the terminology is slightly different. You come up with a plan, you look at what the plan looks like. What you do in that plan is you look at lots of different courses of actions that might happen, or things that could happen, worst case and best case. Worst case and best case, yes. Then what you do is you brief that out. We call it a set of orders. In that brief is a phase known as the mission, and it is delivered twice. It's delivered twice for a reason, because essentially, no matter what happens in that plan, which never really goes according to plan, the mission is all that matters. You need to constantly have that in the back of your mind and sort of work around it, and always default back to what is it that we're trying to achieve. Once those orders are given, you go out and you deliver, or we used to call it execute, and you go and get the job done. But you enter into that delivery, into that execution phase with an extremely flexible mindset. You've got your procedures in place. You have your standard operating procedures that you never really deviate from, but you are allowed a flexible mindset. And then the biggest key to a lot of all of the stuff that you do in the military is the debrief. No matter whether things go well and according to plan, or badly and completely off track, you always go into a debrief where you can look at how you could do things better. Even if it was a successful mission, you still do a debrief and look at how you can do things better, because I'm telling you now, there is always something that has gone slightly wrong and could have made things slightly more smooth. So with that in mind, and pull that all together, that is what I believe builds resilience. It can be taught. It also comes down to experience as well, but it definitely can come with experience. But for me, the biggest thing is all about emotional awareness. And what I mean by that is, when you go into these situations, whether it's an everyday situation where you wake up on a Monday and you feel a little bit down, and you don't really pay it the respect it deserves, and you just crack on with the rest of the day, or whether you're in the ditch and you're wanting to be at home with your mum as a 10-year-old boy, Emotional awareness is the key to getting you through those moments. It's about paying that emotion the respect it deserves. So for me in the ditch, it was fear. And you take however much time you need and however much time is available to you. And you look at what that emotion is all about and why it's within you and why it's making you feel like it is. For me, it was fear. All I did with that fear, instead of allowing it to be a negative and turning me into a flapping headless chicken, I allowed it to focus my mind on what I needed to do to get myself out of that situation. It's the same with a Monday morning blues feeling. Instead of ignoring that feeling and cracking on with the rest of the day, probably being a little bit miserable to all the people around me, I will sit on the end of my bed and I will take the time to look at myself and wonder why it is that I'm feeling a certain way. Because I'm doing that, I'll eventually work out why I feel that, and then I'll look at a coping strategy or something that I can do to get me out of that situation that I didn't really want to be in. So that for me is essentially my delivery to you. It is all about courage, determination, unselfishness, cheerfulness in the face of adversity. But ultimately, it's about it being emotionally aware and being emotionally aware of the people around you as well. So thanks for listening to me. I hope that was insightful.
Jason, thank you so much.